Have you ever had a position on which you feel that you have an overwhelming advantage and then you just ruin it a couple of moves later? Well, don't worry because this happened to pretty much all of us, including extremely strong players like World Championship challengers. And here's a position that really shocked me when I first saw it. This is a game played between Sigbert Tarash, who was challenging Emanuel Lasker, the second world champion. And in this position it is black to play. White has a slight and annoying advantage because this bishop on b2 is actually quite strong, putting pressure on this diagonal. This knight might also jump to f5. So the position might look quiet, but black still has to solve some problems. Black also has this a pawn that might become a target, which is isolated. That's why here black tried a concrete idea and played the move knight to g4. The idea is that if this knight is attacked, for example, then bishop to f6 will invite this trade of bishops. So black would be happy to trade the bishop on e7 for this strong bishop on b2. But this move has a tactical problem, which is the move bishop takes g7. So here white is capturing on g7, and the idea is that after king takes g7, knight to f5 gives a check, and then white will capture on g4, get an extra pawn and a much better position. That's why here Lasker played the move knight takes f2. So before capturing on g7, the idea is to take on f2. Black is also attacking the queen. And here white captured the knight, which is okay, but there was also the very strong move queen to d4, keeping the strong bishop, and now planning to capture the knight. And here white is actually getting quite an overwhelming advantage because after the knight moves, for example, knight to f5, we see that black's king is really exposed, and white has much more active pieces than black. But it is very hard to criticize white for playing the move king takes f2, because after king takes, white played knight to f5. Now we see that without the g-pawn, the f5 square is weak, so this knight looks extremely strong there. Here black played king to h8. Black has to be careful about queen to g4 ideas. That's why king to h8 has the idea to play rook to g7 against queen to g4. So here white played the move queen to d4, white is centralizing the queen, eyeing the king and this pawn a7, so white's position looks dominating. Here black played the move f6, and here white took on a7. There was the idea to take on e7, but exchanging this knight on f5 for this bishop, honestly it is very hard, even though in that case white is playing the position with pretty much no risk. But white took the pawn on a7, which looks very natural because black is not getting anything direct in return. For example, here c5, planning to drop the queen wouldn't work because white can play queen to a6 and then just bring the queen back. And additionally now black is still weakening the light squares even further. So here black played bishop to f8. And now white brought the queen back to d4. The queen is centralized, very well placed there. So this position looks totally lost for black, doesn't it? White has an extra pawn. This knight on f5 is dominating the bishop on f8, so white has a good knight and black has a bad bishop. Wouldn't you be amazed if I told you that in 7 moves black was already better in this position and white didn't play any particularly bad move? So here in this position white has an extra pawn which is a pass pawn, so it might become quite strong. For example, in an ending it might become very powerful. And overall white has a better pawn structure, as I said, a very strong knight. But here we'll see that black finds some amazing resources, and this just shows how extremely strong Emanuel Lasker was. So even when having a seemingly desperate position, he finds an extremely strong counterplay. There's something to be said against white's position, which doesn't compensate for white's advantages. White does have an advantage in this position, but there are some potential targets that black might find. One of them is the pawn on e4, which is isolated. So far it is well defended. Another idea is that the king on f2 might be exposed, so white would love to bring the king, for example, to h1. But as we see, it might be a bit difficult. And additionally, black has the idea to change the pawn structure. So this is quite important because the knight on f5 so far is very strong. But if the pawn structure changes, then this knight might be kicked away from that position. So black has ideas to change the pawn structure with the move d5. The move c5, as we saw, is a weakening move for black because light squares are going to become very weak, and black doesn't have a light squared bishop. But d5 is a serious idea in this position. In any case, now this pawn on f6 is being attacked, and if black plays passively, then the game is going to be over pretty quickly. For example, after queen to f7, here I like a move like king to g1, just safeguarding the king, and the game is pretty much over. That's why black defends this pawn in the most active way and plays the move rook to e5. So the rook here is very well placed. It's eyeing the knight and the pawn, and now it's indirectly defending the pawn on f6 because now queen takes f6 is not a legal move. And here white played a natural move. White played the move rook a to d1, just improving this rook and bringing the rook to a semi-open file. But actually the rook on d1 is not doing a lot, so this move is probably not the best. But again, it is very hard to judge here because playing such a natural move when you have such an advantage looks fine. And as I said, this position might look easily winning for white, but it is not actually, because black has very concrete ideas. And actually, white's player Tarrasch was a very dogmatic player, so it must have been very hard to lose this game, whereas Lasker had a different approach to the game, always looking for concrete ideas in a position. And this position actually shows how hard chess can be sometimes, because this position, according to my analysis with a strong chess engine, I found one clear way for white to keep the advantage. For example, here king to g1 is a move that I would like to play just to improve the king a little bit. But here after d5, black is already getting quite a strong counterplay. There's pressure on e4, also on f5, white cannot capture on d5 because this would just blunder a knight. So the move that leaves white with a clear advantage here is the move knight to h4. So playing a knight from f5 to h4 is a bit hard, even though the idea is to bring the knight to f3. So just bring the knight from f5 to f3, but the point is to attack this very strong rook on e5. So after, for example, bishop to h6, knight to f3, white gets an advantage. For example, if the rook moves, then white might even try this idea of playing a4, pushing this very strong past a pawn. The knight on f3 is also defending the king, so white would have a clear advantage in this position. But after rook a to d1, black played rook d to e8, increasing the pressure on e4, and here white again has to go for this idea of knight to h4, but white played the move queen to c3, eyeing this pawn on c6, and here black, first of all, cannot take on e4 because the queen would capture on f6. Black could have tried d5, which was the main idea, but here black played the move queen to f7, which is a bit of a bluff because white could have actually captured the pawn on c6. Maybe black was afraid of rook to c5. The queen now here is defending on e4, so black cannot capture on e4. But after rook to c5, black attacks the queen and the pawn, but here white can simply move the queen. And if black captures on c2, then after rook to e2, white is exchanging pieces, which is what white would like, just going towards an ending and then pushing this past a pawn. And we see that in this position, besides the king, all of white's pieces are on light squares, so they cannot be attacked by the bishop. So this would have led to an advantage for white. But instead white played another pretty natural move, knight to g3. Now the knight defends on e4, also prevents queen to h5 ideas. But this is just too passive, and black starts playing actively, and as we'll see, we'll get an advantage pretty shortly. Black played bishop to h6. Now we see that this bishop might actually become quite a strong piece. And after queen to f3 and d5, white took on d5, which actually was a bad move. It was better to play knight to f5 first, controlling e3 and then taking on d5. This would have kept an advantage for white, although the position is much more complicated than a few moves before. But it takes e5 was a bit naive, because black has a very strong bishop to e3, before capturing d5, giving a check. And after king to f1, black took on d5, and again white had to play knight to f5, not allowing black to cement this bishop on e3, because after rook to d3 and queen to e6, we see how black is piling up on the e-file, and white's king is not going to be safe there. So the position is already actually better for black. Amazingly, after just 7 moves, now it is white the one who is in trouble. And we see how this bishop that was very miserable on f8, now it is actually a very strong piece on e3. So the game continued rook to e2, black played f5, this very bad pawn on f6, now it's going to become an attacking piece. Black is really attacking with all of its pieces. Rook to d1, f4, knight to h1, and d4. White is really just moving the pieces on its side of the board, and black is just progressing. Here white brought the knight back to the game with knight to f2. So this position is already clearly better for black from a practical point of view, even though black is a pawn down. White really has to defend extremely accurately. And this is a game that I really liked, not only because of how black completely changes the game from a winning position to a losing position. I actually found particularly nice this maneuver with the queen that black played by going queen to a6 and queen to h6. So this dancing queen, I really liked it. So here black played the move queen to a6, attacking on a2, and more importantly putting pressure on the rook on e2, which is pinned. So here white is not in time to defend the a pawn, for example after a4. Bishop takes f2, just wins the game because this rook is pinned, and black is going to capture on e2 next. Here white played knight to d3, which as we'll see is a losing move. There was just a very difficult defense in this position, which is the move king to g1. So going from one pin to another is not something that is very natural. So the idea is that now after bishop takes, the rook can capture on f2. And if black captures on a2, for example, then after king to h1, we see how this saving idea was to bring the king to a safer square, and white can hold the game in this position. But after knight to d3, attacking rook, black played rook to g5, and here white played a very passive rook to a1. Black doesn't really care about this pawn because the attack on the king is much more important. Here black played the move queen to h6. So we see how this queen went from a6 to h6, just putting pressure on both sides of the board. And the game is pretty much over because there's no way to defend the pawn on h2. For example, after h3, black will just invade on g3, and after the queen moves, black has many options, but f3 is the simplest idea just to break through. And white cannot capture on f3 because after rook to g1, we get a very nice checkmate. That's why white tried king to e1, but after queen takes h2, white's king is just going to be attacked, so the game is pretty much over. The game continued a few moves, king to d1, queen to g1, knight to e1, rook g to e5, again increasing the pressure on the e-file, and after queen to c6, the game just lasted a few moves. Black doesn't really care about material here, black just wants to attack white's king, and after a4 and f3, pawn takes and bishop to g5. Here white resigned, black is just going to attack on the e-file, rook takes e2 is a big threat, and after white trades rooks, for example, there's a lot of pressure on this knight. White is not in time to defend, for example after queen to a5, black has many possible moves. Black might even try bishop to h4, but queen to e3 is also very strong, planning to go queen to e2, and the game is just over. So this is a World Championship game, so the quality is very high. But in any case, it illustrates how even seemingly desperate position can offer a lot of resources, particularly when there's the option to play actively, or when we have the option to change the pawn structure. So never underestimate your opponent, even if you have an advantage, but your opponent can play actively or change the pawn structure, and keep these ideas whenever you have a bad position as well. Try to play actively and changing the nature of the position. If you like this video, which features former world champion Emanuel Lasker, you might want to check the video on the top right, where I discuss a very interesting endgame study that he composed. If you like this video, please subscribe to this channel to be notified whenever I upload a new video. Thanks, that's it for now, and I'll talk to you soon.